Tristan, this is such a joy to do. As I said to you beforehand, I was sitting with Matt in a restaurant in London. I said, who must I have on the show? Immediately, Tristan. And so I'm so excited that we made this happen. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, thank you for always being a cheerleader.
Oh, fantastic cheerleader, by the way. I think I was distracted by the steak in front of me. But I would love to start with a little bit on you. How did you make your way into the world of startups first? And then how did you come to found DBT most recently?
I was lost soul, went to undergrad business school, went to work for Deloitte Consulting. Didn't really have any idea what I wanted to do. I spent 5 years there. Still lost, went to get my MBA. And then I had a lucky break. One of my good friends from high school and college is Anthony Casalena, and Anthony had founded Squarespace, I don't know, some 5 or so years before. Things were moving quickly, and I ended up spending a year there to do a bunch of things, but partially to help them raise their Series A. And it was an environment that I had never seen before. I mean, just the whole concept that I could wear jeans and a t-shirt to work, coming from a Deloitte background, was just I loved it. I loved that, like, you could just sit down and do the work and not make PowerPoint slides about doing the work. And so I just decided that I was never going back. And then the hard thing, honestly, for a consultant was to figure out how to make myself useful in this context, because the majority of the skills that I had learned to this point in my professional career were not that useful. I wasn't the person who built the product. I wasn't the person who was going to sell the product. And so I really doubled down on my data skill set, which had been something that I'd been good at for a long time. But I had to figure out ways of making that useful. And for me, that was marketing. I learned how to do performance marketing. I learned how to do early stage marketing is highly quantitative, and so I spent my first 7 years in startups doing marketing in various shapes and forms.
I love that. I mean, I have a couple of things I have to unpack there. First, I actually had Anthony on the show before. Fantastic dude. I loved him. The first thing that you mentioned, though, was luck. I always think, how important is the role of luck versus skill? And I go back and forth on this. When you think about that, how important do you think luck versus skill is?
I think that you need some amount of luck to kind of be in the game, whatever it is. You need some minimum bar of luck, and then above that, it's probably skill. But I can tell you for a fact that I Anthony and I both come from this little town called Hereford, 30 minutes north of Baltimore. We talk about it as we're from the forest. There's nobody that works at a startup there. Nobody that has any concept of what the technology ecosystem looks like. And so there was just not a path for me to go in this direction. You've already spoken to him, so you kind of know his story. But so if I hadn't had that little moment of luck there, I honestly don't know what I would be doing in my life right now, but it certainly wouldn't be this.
I love that. This little town has created 10 to 15 billion dollars of enterprise value in markets. It's pretty impressive, to be honest. It's more than most European countries. I do want to touch on, I spoke to many of your investors before the show, and one thing where they were resoundingly agreed upon is your skills in terms of team building and specifically talent detection. So I wanted to double down on this. How do you spot talent so much better than anyone else? We look at non-obvious sources. I spoke to, obviously, Ines on your marketing team, and she said about never having done marketing, your co-founder being a marketing intern before. How do you spot talent so much better without historical data?
This is such an interesting question. It's not what I've processed out loud before, so let me see what I can do. Do you know that feeling that you get when you have a conversation with somebody and it's locked in? It's the two of you are very tightly communicating and have a shared understanding of the world. That is the feeling that I get when I get really excited about somebody. So we could talk about Drew, my co-founder. We could talk about Janessa, but I think that the like most interesting example of this is Erin, who was our very first employee. She worked with myself and Drew and Connor at our last company, RJ Metrics, and I had really spent almost no time with Erin there. We were on different teams, whatever, but I had been in exactly one meeting with Erin, and Erin was like kind of a junior-ish person there. She was an individual contributor, sales engineer, and there was some conversation happening in this meeting, and Erin kind of raised her voice and said, like, she kind of like cut through some kind of like complexity or BS that was going on in this moment, and I was just like, who's that? And from that point onwards, I was like, that's a person that I need to stay in touch with. And so she was one of my very first calls as to figure out like how are we going to grow this team, and Erin now runs customer success for us and has for 5 years. And Erin has never, led a large team before. She's certainly never like operated at this level. But I don't know. This might be controversial, but honestly, I don't think that a lot of our jobs, including my job, are like that hard. It's not that you need to have seen this a million different times and that you need to be the best in the world. You need to have a certain set of traits. You need to be hardworking. You need to have a like clear mind and be willing to say what your mind has on it. We can talk more about values later, but I think that I think it's like fundamentally the talent search algorithm is fundamentally like not that hard. People just get focused on the wrong stuff. Like have you led a customer success team at scale before? Like that's the wrong question.
Okay, can I, and this is where, like, I used to remember I started when I was like 17, 18, and so I just agreed with everything everyone said because I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
If I look now, I've built a media company over 8 years. If you hired me as your CMO, say, I would know a lot because I've been doing it for 8 years. If you hired someone fresh into marketing, they would have no idea about how to think about distribution, flywheels, channel by channel optimization, all of the hard yards that it's taken me 8 years to learn. Same with sales, same with CS. Do you not think that experience has value in that way?
Okay, it's a good point, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to clarify. So, one of the strategic levers that I've tried to use throughout our 6 years is to use time as a weapon. I think that there's this tremendous focus inside of the tech ecosystem to, at every point in time, grow as quickly as possible. From Y Combinator, like if you're not growing your user base 10% every single week, then like whatever.
You're out.
Should I say? Yeah, I was going to say, fuck you, get out. And it did like, blitz scaling with Reed's book. And I think that making the decision to strategically take a long time in certain cases allows you to create strengths that are uncopyable. In the market. And so our first 3.5 years, we were bootstrapped. We certainly could have raised money, but we didn't. We were a revenue generating business, and we built DBT on the side. And there were so many good things that came out of that. We developed a like user experience that was beloved. We didn't feel in a rush to do that. We grew a team that had some core members that are still leading the business today, that developed this like deep trust between all of us and like shared headspace. There's some things that you can't actually replicate by just throwing dollars onto a fire.
Sorry, I was writing on my hand because I didn't want to forget. And when you get to my age, memory is not a strength. You said there about kind of, building slowly, but building defensibility and moats within that. And actually, sometimes you have to go slow to go far. What did you do in terms of building defensibility and moats that was a deliberate decision not to go fast, but to build the right way?
The two biggest things are our we took a long time to monetize our software. DBT Core is open source. It's used by, I don't know, over 14,000 companies today. And we, for a very long time, didn't have a commercial product on top of it. And so the way that we supported it was we sold consulting services to implement it, which is a hard business. I mean, running a consulting business and then taking the dollars from that and reinvesting them into like building the open source software is challenging. But it allowed us to create this user experience that was unreplicated throughout the industry. And it very today, maybe we have some competitors that have popped up here and there, but really DBT is as close as you can get to a standard in the modern data stack, and is just like very widely deployed. And if somebody wants to do data transformation, what DBT does, they use DBT. And I really think it's because we spent such a long time, refining this use case and being users ourselves. And then the other obvious one is just community. We took a long time to build the community, and we did it from a place of being members of that community. Like, we were practitioners ourselves, and so we built the community that we needed.
Do you think startups idealize the MVP, move fast, break things, test, get something out every week? How would you advise founders who are often told that?
I really believe in that. So we do. I still try to get us to, and certainly in the early days, we released software that was not always perfect, and that I think is fine, because if we in the early days had these very extensive release processes and et cetera, we would not have had the iteration speed and cycles that we needed to get to a good place. I'm not suggesting that you move slowly from an execution standpoint. I'm suggesting that you move slowly from a monetization standpoint, and like growing the business. So there's what we found out is that the minute that you have $1 million in software ARR, you're on a clock. Like that, people can take kind of infinitely long to get to $1 million. It doesn't really matter. That's perceived to be like wandering around in the wilderness, and that's fine. But as soon as you hit $1 million, it's like, well, next year you better have 3, and the next year after that you better have 9. So you should take a really long time to get on that treadmill, because you can't really get off once you do.
And it's actually almost harder to raise once you have revenue. I know
Correct.
It sounds strange, but it's easier to raise pre-revenue with adoption.
And that is a common playbook in commercial and in like B2C companies, but it is much less well understood inside of B2B enterprise software. I think that maybe we were not at the very beginning, but we were certainly early in having investors kind of accept that our business was going to grow differently. And I talked to investors throughout our 3.5 years of bootstrapping, and the question was always, what metrics would you evaluate our business to determine whether or not we were ready for a Series A? And the answers were like kind of all over the place, and like not that relevant. And when we eventually went down the road of fundraising, it was because we were getting good answers to that question. The answers were like, well, you folks are, category creators and are set to, own this part of the market. And we understand that for open source companies, when they become standards in a certain part of the market, that is a boulder that is going to keep rolling downhill. Okay, that's the kind of logic we use when we think about our business.
I get it. Can I ask, why did you decide to turn on monetization when you did? Because those are the two questions. When do you raise and when do you monetize? Why did you decide the time you did to turn on monetization, given what we said about kind of the benefits of not?
I am a big fan of a company called Reboot and an individual named Jerry Colonna. I read his book a while ago, and he talks about something called the pathless path. I think it's like a Buddhist concept that you can't really know what the road in front of you looks like, and so instead you have to adopt some principles whereby you figure out how to navigate that road when when you get closer to it. So I honestly I don't have a strategic answer to that question. I have a principles-based answer, and the principles-based answer is that we navigate as much of our strategy as we can by asking what the community needs from us at any given point in time. And so what happened in 2019 is that we went from a kind of the DBT community went from a place where kind of the cool kid early adopters hung out to a place where the Fortune 500 data people showed up. And we heard from half a dozen or so of these folks, and they said, we want to use DBT too, but we are actually not allowed to use open source software without a commercial relationship to the vendors. And you don't have anything for us to buy. We want to pay you money. Please help us figure out how to pay you money. And it was this moment where, and we owned 100% of the cap table at this point, myself and my two co-founders and our employees. And so it was, we were hoping to do the kind of base camp path of like, let's just own this thing internally and, grow it on internally generated revenue. But it was very clear that these companies needed something that we were not going to be able to deliver without meaningfully investing in the business.
What did you need when you think about transition from community and community adoption to enterprise adoption? I think a lot of people think SSO, but what is required to make the transition from community grassroots to enterprise heavy, full rollout across Fortune 500s? Because it's so much more complex.
I'm laughing because we're still in the process of doing that, and I'm getting PTSD from even thinking about that. Certainly I don't remember if it was the first thing or the second thing that we built. Our SSO integrations. We built role-based access control. We've built audit logging. We've had to answer a lot of kind of questions about the security profile of the application. If you have an extremely mature multi-tenant environment, then you can answer all the security questionnaires in a certain way. And if you aren't yet there from a technology perspective, then you have to think about other deployment options that will allow you to answer the security questions that way. So I think that there's this kind of, and I've talked to now so many enterprise software founders who have kind of like made it through this messy period of like hacking together the like checkboxes that you need to sell into the enterprise. But fortunately, if you do the like unscalable thing first, but you slowly have a motion to like make it do the scalable version of it, then you'll slowly work your way through. And I think that you can see that in Databricks and Confluent and Snowflake, and like they've all kind of hit this escape velocity where they've checked all the boxes and they can do it in a scalable way.
Totally with you, and I think you're absolutely right in terms of finding that scalability. We mentioned hiring earlier, and when you move into enterprise, your org also changes as well as the product does. When you think about hiring mistakes that you made, are there some big hiring mistakes that stand out to you, and how did that change your mindset?
This is a hard one for me. We now have 350 people on the team, which either is unbelievably huge or still very tiny, depending on your perspective. And certainly not everyone who has joined us on that journey is still at the company. But I would say that we have an unbelievably high retention rate, both voluntary and involuntary. So there really just aren't that many people who we've hired over the years that are no longer with the company. I mean, it's like maybe a dozen, maybe somewhere around that number. There.
Can I be blunt? You're either a fucking majestic picker, or you then, or you have B or C team players still, which
Yeah. That is a fair response. I don't, and to a certain extent, none of us know what we don't know. But
do you even believe though? Sorry, I'm interrupting
Yeah.
you, but like, I don't buy this whole only a team player thing. If you have more than 100 people, by definition, a team is like the top 1% in my mind. You can't have only a team if you're going to build a sizable company. It's impossible.
I don't know that I come at it from that exact perspective, but I also have my own challenges with the like A team, B team, C team players, because I don't. This kind of goes back to what I was saying before, that I don't think that most of our jobs are that hard, and I think that oftentimes it is our ability to work together, to communicate, to have a consistent approach and consistent set of values that really determines the performance of the team. Because what we really need to be solving for is the performance of the team and not the performance of individuals. I guess that is an answer, is that some of the ways that we've found that folks are no longer at the company have to do less with individual performance and more with team issues.
I worry with like team goals, you lose individual accountability. You can have people who kind of coast along in a good team and actually aren't good individual contributors and like executors of plan. Do you worry that with team plans and team goals, it can hide a lot of sins on the individual basis?
I'm in no way trying to say that individual performance is a non-factor. And we maybe overinvest in performance management, like formal performance management. We've done this since the very beginning of the company. When it was 3 of us, we like had quarterly performance reviews. And so we spend a lot of time talking, writing, holding ourselves accountable to the goals that we set for each other.
What do they entail? Sorry, I don't do performance reviews for my teams, and I probably should. What do they entail? How do you structure them? What do they look like?
Historically, it's been an hour once a quarter, and we actually have. It's a little unusual. We have 3 people in the room. We have the person, their direct manager, and then typically a skip level. Although we've stepped away from that a little bit. It's like we call it the third person. And the goal that I always set for these meetings is that we don't leave the room without somebody saying something that feels uncomfortable. Because, the way that I like to say it is that, if you've ever been in a long-term relationship, you know that relationship does not stay healthy just by itself. Like there need to be these hard conversations every once in a while. Like, hey, you've really been pissing me off by doing X, Y, Z. And if you don't have those conversations, then slowly people build up animosities. Relationships deteriorate without them. And so these hour-long sessions once a quarter are these reset opportunities to say, like, okay, let's just get your shit out there and let's talk about it.
So this is not how many SQLs and MQLs you bought. This is, hey, I feel like you're not contributing in the same way that you did last quarter. Is something up? Why are you acting in this way?
Totally. It is also the feedback goes the other direction too. I feel like you're not setting me up for success because you're not. We've changed our goals twice in the past quarter, and it's impossible to like actually create programs along that kind of cadence. That kind of thing.
Yeah. To which you say you're fired. No, I'm joking.
No.
No, I hear you're brilliant at accepting feedback. The hard thing, though, with like these conversations, which are very human and deep and meaningful, hopefully, is you're not in person a lot of the time. And I wanted to talk about this, and remote in particular. And you said before, working remotely is terrible, but distributed companies are amazing. And I kind of did a double take on this. I was like, where's Tristan going with this one? So what did you mean by working remotely is terrible, but distributed companies are amazing?
We have an HQ location in Philadelphia because the original team is from Philadelphia. We are now, most of us are in the States. I think it's like 75 or 80% are in the States, but we're located in, I don't know, something like 40 states. And we have maybe 10 or 15% of us are in EMEA, Europe, and 5 or 10% are in Australia and New Zealand. And so we are very much a distributed company. The other word that I like to use is asynchronous. So I think of us as a distributed asynchronous company. And those things describe how work is done. Work gets done by people who are far apart and often on different time zones. But that doesn't mean that we need to be remote. We're in the process of opening up an office in San Francisco. Our biggest concentration of talent is now in San Francisco. I think it's like 15% of the employee population. And it's not because we've tried to hire people in San Francisco. It just turns out there's a lot of great people there. And when you open up job postings, that people apply from there. And so there's no specific. It's not like we have engineering in San Francisco or support in San Francisco. Nothing like that. It's just that there are team members there. And so one of my favorite lines on this was from Sid at GitLab. He said, "Working remotely doesn't mean working from home." And so we've really taken that to heart. We all have different things that we get out of work, and one of those things is community. And so we don't plan our office spaces around doing work together in person. We plan them around giving people a place to work that is outside of their home and allowing them to connect with their local community.
So can I ask, why there's so much to unpack here. Why is remote terrible in your mind?
Because it's lonely and dehumanizing, and because we're built to interact with other humans. And for many of us, especially for early career folks who are, I lived in an apartment with 4 roommates right out of college. Like, I wouldn't have wanted to work there 40 hours a week. So it's just like not totally consistent with how we are wired as humans.
And then, so totally get you and agree with you there. I love doing the show because it's human interaction. It's nice to break up the day with real conversation. My question to you is on the facilitation of distributed. I had Matt Mullenweg on the show from WordPress who spoke about the budgets that they give to all employees to go work in a coffee shop, to go find a local space. What budgets and how do you structure them to allow for these distributed workspaces?
Everybody gets, I think it's $250 a month for an out-of-home stipend. So whether that's we work with a vendor called Liquid Space, and so if there's Liquid Spaces in your area, it makes it very easy to sign up for them. But you can also just expense, drop-in space or wherever. And the $250 is probably not enough to get outside your home every single day, but it's hopefully enough to make it so you don't go crazy. So that's step one, and then step two is, of course we also have a budget for people to set up their home offices, but step one is blanket everyone with a work out of home budget, and then step two is in places where we have high concentration of employees, open up satellite offices. We're calling this our many satellites strategy. And then the people who live in, we haven't finalized the like driving distance or anything, but for people who live in commutable distance of these satellites, then you lose your $250 and you are assumed that you're going to go into this satellite as your out-of-home experience.
So if you're like 46 minutes away and it's a 45-minute drive, are you fucked?
I don't know.
This is a brilliant idea.
Well, it's. I don't know if you've spent any time in a WeWork or in a co-working space generally, but
terrible.
Yeah, we spent 3 years in co-working spaces, and they were the right thing for the right time for our company. And I don't want to like say that that's not a good option to have on the table, but I actually got really into when we rented our office space. We rented it back in the beginning of 2019. It opened at the end of 2019. I spent a tremendous amount of time on selecting it, working with architects and designers. Like we really built it out to convey our brand values, and it's so much better for your employee community to be working in this space that like reflects our values back at them.
Man, I totally agree with you. I was not a fan. So I'm very much aligned. Can I ask you, we spoke earlier about, the growth. We also spoke about growth community, monetization, fundraising. And I did want to touch on, before we focus on your management, we've spoken before about aligning success between specifically two different parties. One is like success from a founder, and then the other is success from an investor. How do you think about kind of aligning success in that way and not making it binary either way?
There's so much here. I think that maybe the most important job of the CEO, at least in the way that I think about it, is to keep all of the different stakeholders in mind at all times and try to balance their interests, their like long-term interests against one another. So if you specifically think about it from the perspective of the founders and investors, for a long time, I had, I talked before about the like vision of creating Basecamp, the like internally funded thing, and you can imagine where if that's the path that you go down, that success looks very different. I mean, I grew up in a very kind of middle class background, and all the money in the world to me felt like, I don't know, $10 million, $50 million. I mean, that was like all the money I could possibly imagine. And so you can imagine growing a company to that kind of scale. And if it's completely employee and founder owned, an acquisition at that level is great. That's a great outcome. The minute that you get institutional capital involved, then that changes. And this is one of the biggest decisions that we had to. This was the trade-off that we made when we first fundraised. It was like, do we want to trade this modest success goal for a unicorn, whatever you want to talk about it, goal, and the risk associated with going big is much greater. You can really imagine how, and there's really great people in the SaaS community that really are pushing hard to create funding opportunities that allow founders to optimize for these $5, $10, $50 million exits. And I love that. And I wish that was the path that made sense for us. But that was a real cost for us. And we only wanted to take the first step down that path when we felt like we had a shot at success on that level, and that like it's really what our community needed from us.
So I have many thoughts here. The first thought I have is, and I'm going to make a bold statement. This is coming from a VC, so I'm admitting my sins. I think you sold freedom for scale of money. And I think about this today too. Like when I have, the fund sizes I have now, I have more freedom because they're smaller funds. If I want to go and be the next Andreessen or Thrive, I lose a lot of freedom. You have to build team out very quickly. You have to do a lot more in terms of performance reviews, one-on-one structuring. When you're small, you have freedom, you have flexibility. You could print, $5, $10 million a year in revenue, which I'm not belittling. That's fantastic. But you could do it and just kind of keep going and make great money. But you decided to go big, and with that, you do lose freedom.
So the trade-off for us was, I agree with you, the cost is freedom, but the upside wasn't more money. It was expanding the community, expanding the set of humans that we could actually include in the community.
But you could have done that over time. It was the acceleration of that community.
I don't think so. It was very binary. Like the kind of business that we were building towards, we could build a credible, credit card swipe, $100 per user per month, something like that. But our customers today, that's not. I mean, that still makes up a large percentage of the companies that we sell to. But there was just no path to get from there to, Fortune 50 company adopting this across 1,000 employees. Like it just wasn't feasible.
Totally. But you couldn't have used the self-funded bootstrap business to then fund an enterprise business over. I know it's slow.
So I think that one of the things that's interesting about this is like, what is the environment that your company is operating in? And so if you're building something that I think has a long time horizon of relevance, then yeah, maybe you can reinvest over the course of 5-10 years. And I think that there are product categories like productivity software, like email marketing clients or whatever that the need is real and it is fairly consistent over the course of a decade or more. Our space moves incredibly quickly, and so if we took 5 years to reinvest the revenue, the entire space would have changed by the time we got there.
Can I ask a blunt question as well? And you should have come on the show years ago. I was so much more friendly. Do you worry that with all the cash coming in, you just get diluted to shit? And what I mean by that is like, we've seen founders before have $10 billion exits and make like $40 million because they have 4%. With the more and more cash, you just get continuously diluted. How do you think about that? And what's your mentality around
that? That is an interesting question for me to answer. You can look up our. I think I don't know how many of our valuations are public. We were public about our last one, the 4.2 billion valuation, and so our fundraise in, I think it was January or February.
How big was the fundraise?
It was 222.
See, that is a great rate. So you dilute by like 5 or 6%.
Yeah, it was like
not that much, and you add 200 million to your balance sheet. Beautiful.
Well, the market was very conducive, but so I honestly, I don't know how I would have tried to balance that in a different market environment. It turns out that we raised 4 rounds of funding all during COVID, and the valuations during that period started off attractive and only got more attractive. And so, fortunately for employees and founders, we're not in the situation that you described there.
I totally get you. Can I ask you? And again, I used to be so nice. 4.2. It's a lot, and you're a fantastic company, but that's a lot of cash. Do you worry? Everyone's like, "Wow, these companies are going to have to live into those valuations now." Do you worry about living into what was a very excited valuation?
I think that there's a lot of companies, including public software companies, that are doing a lot of living into a lot of things. So we're not alone there. The good news is that we are executing incredibly well. We are growing very quickly. We are moving. I think that one of the challenges that was introduced by the valuation environment is that it prized growth to such an extent that efficiency was like not even a conversation. I'm trying to search my memory banks. I don't even know that I talked about an efficiency metric in any of our fundraises. And Fortunately, my my history in growing the business over the course of 3.5 years in a bootstrap fashion, I am I'm like a reasonably financially conservative person because of that experience, and so we have always been a pretty efficient business. We have had to recalibrate a little bit over the past 6 months, but it hasn't been some like gut wrenching change. It's been like some nudging of the steering wheel in one direction.
Can I ask, when you say about efficiency metrics, what sort of efficiency metrics would one expect to be asked about? I should probably
Oh,
know this, but I'm not a growth investor.
COGS, gross margin, really not like.
That wasn't as scientific as I thought.
Oh no, we internally we were very focused on a metric called cost to book. So which is like not that different from customer acquisition cost, but it's like the math works just slightly differently. I think that's probably the main one that you see growth stage enterprise software companies focusing on now,
And
because
so
if
cost of, just so I understand it, is
yeah.
customer acquisition cost, but not? How does it differ, just so I get it?
Oh geez, it excludes margin. So it's done, or rather, it's done on a margin basis as opposed to a revenue basis. So if you're a margin inefficient business, then your cost to book will look worse. Most companies, if you just look at customer acquisition cost, and you're selling $100 sneakers, and the sneakers cost $50 to get from your suppliers, you're actually overstating how efficient your business is if you just look at CAC. Anyway, I think that a lot of enterprise software companies, because they were so focused on growth, they've often paid a lot of money for that growth. And very very fortunately, because our fundamental growth comes from organic community adoption of our open source product, we've always been a pretty efficient growth business.
I totally get you in terms of that bottoms-up community-led growth that you have. Can I ask you, when we think about, you as a leader, you mentioned the growth of the business. I'm always fascinated by the term high performance. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts. When you think about high performance today in leadership, what do you think of?
I think I don't use that formulation for leaders or for individuals. Certainly I would kind of understand how to call a business high performance or not. And so maybe for me, a high performance leader is one that like results in a high performance business. I think that we've found that the best leaders communicate very clearly. They bring their entire organizations along for the ride, whether it's the good parts or the bad parts. They like transparency is a core value of ours, and but transparency. It's not exactly clear how to operationalize transparency, and so when we hire leaders from the outside, there is this period of learning what transparency means internally, and sometimes that can be awkward for folks, even who supposedly come from environments that are transparent. We were talking about efficiency a second ago. We recently went through this whole exercise in optimizing our cost to book primarily inside of our revenue organization. And this was, in many organizations, this would be like finance dictates certain changes have to happen. The CRO decides how to do it and pushes it out to the teams. And that's just like not at all how that happened at our company. It was collaborative between sales and finance. And then our sales leader, Nick, actually wrote up this 7-page long document in Notion and then asked for comment from the folks on his team. Like, how should we roll this out? How do you want to do this? And it was all like in the light of day. And these changes really did have real impact on the humans on Nick's team. But this is just like the way that we communicate with each other. Like we share good news and we share hard truths, and we ask for people to be adults. And I think that's really how you get the most out of your team.
Are there things that okay, so a couple of things. Are there things that you can't be transparent on? So like exits, you can't be transparent. People, see their exit numbers light up and woo, they're checked out. Or they're fundraising, they suddenly get super jacked that there's new rounds coming together, and then it doesn't for whatever reason. And there are do you think there are limits to transparency?
The main limit to transparency that we have drawn is when it conflicts with an individual's privacy. So we don't, and Netflix in No Rules, Reed talks about how they're very transparent about employee exit reasons, and we don't do that. We say more than nothing, but we don't say like, that person was doing terribly, we fucking fired him. That
Harry was a shit interviewer. We never liked him. And...
Right. That so and there's other things that like we share public salary bands on every job posting, but we don't share an individual's salary. So it's in that band, but you don't know exactly what. So it's this line we try to draw between being transparent and being invasive of people's privacy.
I totally get that. Yeah, I think that's right in the individual level. Can I ask? I think in leadership, there's painful moments often, and they're often the most useful from an education standpoint. When you think back to the DBT journey, what's been the most painful lesson that you're also quite pleased to have been through from a learning perspective? And what did you learn?
It flows nicely. I think it was about operationalizing transparency. So the companies that I had always worked at, the expectation was that you as an employee were going to learn about a fundraise once everything had been signed and the money was in the bank. It's like, hey, guess what? We got, $5 million, whatever. Because, as there are a million things that can go wrong with a deal before the money is wired. And you don't want to have egg on your face if something does fall apart. The challenge with that approach is that it doesn't give employees information that they might use to, for example, decide things like when to exercise their options. And that has real tax implications, or all kinds of implications for employees. And so when we raised our Series B, we raised our seed A and B, we used kind of the historical approach that I had been familiar with, which is like, hey, guess what? We just raised money. Our employees were not super jazzed about that at our Series B. They wish that we had been more transparent with them, because
they sold beforehand and they could have exercised in post and been better.
They wish that I believe that the sentiment was, we wish that we'd known that this was coming together so that we could sell before the 409A, not sell, so that we could exercise before the 409A changed. Again, I was like, does anyone do this? And the answer came back like, yes. GitLab, as in so many things, taught us how to do that differently. GitLab actually says to their employees, hey, we're thinking about fundraising right now, full stop. And they don't say like, here's the terms we're going to...
But the data is so incomplete that it could be 2 billion, it could be 4 billion, and the numbers associated are so different that actually I almost feel unfair communicating with such imperfect data.
I will. So I think that's a fair. That's a fair statement, but I think that our employees have been very consistent that they want more information rather than less. And so what we've done, we did it in our C and our D, was that we, a month before anything kind of came together, we said like, hey, there's interest in the market. We're probably going to raise in some reasonably near term time frame. We don't have any details, but that we wanted to let you know that the wheels were happening, and we're not going to sign any term sheets for the next 30 days, so you got time. And that has been challenging to operationalize because sometimes fundraising markets move very quickly, sometimes whatever. But that's a commitment to our employees that we've felt pretty strongly about because of how strongly they voiced their feedback and at the Series B.
One thing that I ask myself with scaling funds and scaling media companies is like my relationship to money has changed over time. How do you think about your relationship to money? How do you think about secondaries options and exercising them? How do you think about that as individual and personally?
Yeah.
I'm always keen for founders to take secondaries, ironically.
Yeah. I we have started a secondary program. We did it. It's like a little over a year ago. We did it earlier this year. Our goal is, it's impossible to know whether the market will continue to support this, but we did it this year in the middle of a very challenging market. So our goal is to provide opportunities for secondary on an annual basis, and we have a general way that we think about how to allocate those. Employees always get to employees of a certain tenure always get to participate at a certain level, but we try to do it in a way that all the rules are consistent between everybody at the company. So I think that fairness in doing this stuff is just unbelievably important, but I also think it is just so important for everybody that's put in like real work into this thing that we're all doing together, that they don't have to kind of wait on the edge of their seat with all of their money invested in this illiquid stock. They should be able to, get some returns for that before an eventual exit.
So you have equal rights between like C-suite and tenured employees and founders, because that's something that I've seen more and more. This obviously clear dislike that there is this imperfect relationship between the rights of one and the rights of another.
Correct, and it's I've followed the news on that, just as I'm sure you have, and it, as a founder, I try to imagine making some of the decisions that have been made at some of these companies, and I can't understand how some of those decisions have been made.
CASH, my friend, cash.
Yeah, I get it, but I get it. You were asked personal relationship to money. Like I talked before about like my fairly modest upbringing, and I'm in a very fortunate position right now where I've exceeded all of my own personal aspirations from a cash perspective, and so it's not it's just not a thing that makes me come to work in the morning anymore.
Final one before we do a quick fire. Do you agree with me in terms of being encouraging of founders to sell? I think the minute that you have, I'm not saying 20, 30 million, I'm saying 5 million, which is still a lot of money. I'm not belittling it, but you're not. You can own a house, you can pay the bills, you can have a family comfortably. And I think that unlock is just such a different level of ambition that it enables. Do you agree with me?
I do. My wife and I both work very hard. The fact that I've had the opportunity to do a little bit of secondary has meant for me that we can. We also have two little kids. We have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it has meant for us that we can renovate our home to actually have bedrooms for our kids. It's meant that we can have childcare support that we need to actually like be able to do our jobs and focus on them. There's a lot of, and it's a tremendous luxury just from a stress reduction perspective. Like there's like things that are just less stressful than they used to be, and not that. I know that there's an incredibly...
For you, what's the biggest stress that is taken away by money?
So there are throughout COVID, being a parent during COVID is/was tremendously challenging, and just making it through was hard. But I think that if you were trying to navigate that, but then also saying, we can't hire a nanny, we can't send our kids to this camp, we can't, whatever. Like, we talk about solving certain classes of problems, a lot of them childcare problems, solving them with money, because otherwise we would, actually suffer meltdowns, I think, in my family at least.
I totally get you, and so very much with you there. I do want to dive into my favorite, which is a quick fire round.
Yeah.
So I say a short statement, my friend, and you dive in. I heard there was a trip to Italy. Why was it so special and important to you?
I have a grass is greener problem. I want to live every life. I want to experience everything, and that is a little inconsistent with having a startup for a decade or more. It's also inconsistent with being a parent, and so this was a really exciting way for me to truly live and work in a different location and absorb the local culture, and just try to experience something brand new. I'm looking forward to doing a lot more of that.
Tell me, Frank Slootman, the trip to his house with the Sequoia CEOs, what did you learn and how was that experience?
I think that a lot of the content you could get if you just read his book. But what was interesting is that, Frank has become one of these kind of iconic figures. He's kind of larger than life, and, some people love him and some people, maybe don't love him as much. But he's certainly larger than life. And this was an opportunity for me to just kind of see him as just another person. He's just he has a really nice house, and he likes to be outdoors, and it's a beautiful view from where he is. But at the end of the day, he's just like a guy. And I know that sounds weird, but sometimes when the moment that I'm in feels very unreal, it's nice to understand that all of us that are trying to figure out these journeys are just people doing our best.
What's the hardest element of your role with DBT today?
Hardest thing is public speaking. I hate public speaking, and I have to do it more often than ever. And I've gotten better at it, but I don't know that I'll ever enjoy it.
What's the secret to a successful marriage?
Listening before you talk.
Negotiating well. If you could be CEO of any other company, what would it be and why?
It would be a 10-person SaaS company that had never taken any funding. Freedom.
Freedom is a benefit. What do you know now that you wish you'd known at the start of DBT?
I think I had a lot of post-job baggage from prior companies that didn't work out the way that that I and others had wanted them to work out, and so I think I was a little gun shy, and didn't have enough confidence. I think that I should have operated with a little bit more confidence when I saw things starting to work.
What have you changed your mind on recently?
I don't have a good answer to that. It's not that I never change my mind. It's that I try not to be the person making decisions. I think a lot of people see the CEO as the person who makes a lot of decisions, and I have a doc that says working with me, and how do I see my job, and in it says I try to make as few decisions as possible. And so you could also ask me what are the 5 most recent decisions you've made, and I don't know the answer to that.
I love that. What do you do to make async work well for you? Is it specific tools? Is it specific timings of the day? Is it blocking time of the day? How do you make async work for you well?
We write a lot, and we put both cultural and technical guardrails in place to actually nudge people to work in the way that we need them to. The problem with async and the time when it's really hard to adopt well is when it's adopted inconsistently. Because if people start putting a bunch of meetings on everybody's calendars and that's how everybody expects work to get done, then all of a sudden async work is impossible because you spend all your time in meetings and nobody gets to write and think and react.
Totally agree. Where do you think most people go wrong with async?
I think it is really hard to say, please cancel that meeting and send us a doc. I think it's really hard to say, like, I'm not going to join that meeting. It's like when it's almost like a human thing. If somebody knocks on your door and says, like, here's this delightful pie, I made it just for you. You're just like, oh, thank you so much, even if you don't like the pie, right? And in the same way, if somebody like says, oh, I'm inviting you to a meeting, here's the agenda, it's very challenging to say, like, that's inconsistent with how we get work done at this company.
Well, I actually just say now, I super appreciate that. I actually think that we can cover a lot of this in email, and if there's anything left over, then let's jump on a call. But I think we can take the majority by email. Do you see what I mean? And
Yeah,
then
I'm stealing them.
Yeah, it works really well, especially for like repeatable processes, sales processes, anything like that. Final one for you, my friend. 5 years time, 2027. What does DBT look like then, and where are we then?
I think that the innovation that's happening in data today is still, and okay, I know every founder in the world references Jeff Bezos' day one letter. I think that data is unbelievably early. And a lot of the conversation in the ecosystem today is about how we've unlocked all these capabilities, but things still feel pretty chaotic for practitioners. And there's really a lot left to do. So I think that in 5 years, there will be more people participating in, creating data, analyzing data. There will be more quality around the data that is produced and consumed, more consistency, more like it will feel less messy.
Tristan, listen, I've loved doing this. I'm sorry for pushing and prodding in ways that I quite enjoy doing, I have to say. But I
Thanks.
loved it. You're a fantastic guest, and I really appreciate the time.
Awesome. Thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun.
You are here, my friend.